The farming situation in America just got a lot worse.
This is awful discouraging. You know, we do our very best to grow a good crop to feed the world, and then we can't hardly give it away.
Bachmann blames President Trump for the soybean crisis, even though he voted for him.
There won't be a farmer left in 5 years if things don't change because our expenses are so high and the crop is worth less than it was 30 years ago.
Now, I've covered this story from a few different angles already, but as more unfolds, I think it's one of the more fascinating stories going on in the US right now. Farmers are sounding the alarm for a variety of reasons, most of which can be traced back to recent policy changes from the Trump administration. Now, there are some other factors at play as well, like rising inflation on many other input costs, along with weather shocks, but overall, the biggest problem, according to these farmers, is the issue with their markets.
We're in the middle of the worst economic downturn that I've seen in my 50 years since the mid-1980s.
Members telling us they feel the Trump administration has let them down.
We voted because he was going to help the farmers, but now it's just hurting us like crazy.
Soybean farmers in particular are facing a drastic problem. China, one of the biggest buyers of American soybeans, has all but given up buying from them. Why? Well, it's simple. Trump's tariffs and trade war. For context, soybeans are one of the largest exports to China in terms of value. In 2024, China purchased $12.64 billion worth from the US. And now, so far this year, they've purchased zero.
The result of the tariffs has been devastating for soybean farmers in particular. Currently, 25% of our soybeans grown in the United States, 1 out of every 4 rows of soybeans goes to China. Right now, China has purchased 0 soybeans.
But if you thought that it couldn't get any worse, well, it did. A photo of a text message to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was taken last week at the UN in what appears to be from the Secretary of the USDA, where it reads, "Finally, just a heads up, I'm getting more intel, but this is highly unfortunate," the text said. "We bailed out Argentina yesterday, and in return, the Argentines are removing their export tariffs on grains, reducing their price. And they sold a bunch of soybeans to China at a time when we would normally be selling to China. Soy prices are dropping further because of it. This gives China more leverage on us." I know some of you are wondering what exactly that message means, so I'm going to break it down. In late September, Argentina suspended its export taxes on soy, corn, and wheat. Now, we've talked on this channel before about how tariffs are an import tax, but what Argentina has is a similar thing, but for some of their exports. Those taxes had been as high as 26%, making their crops more expensive abroad. So when the tax was suddenly gone, China immediately booked at least 10 cargo ships of Argentine soybeans. And as a result, prices for US soy dropped even further, and farmers here in the US were left holding unsold harvests. Just days later, Argentina then reinstated the taxes after hitting a $7 billion export cap. But the damage was already done. China got exactly what it wanted: cheaper soy from somewhere other than the US. Now, at the same time, the US was putting together a $20 billion financial support package for Argentina. Treasury officials insist it's not direct cash, but rather credit tools and swap lines. But obviously, the optics still matter here. Washington was propping up Argentina's far-right president, a Trump ally, while US farmers were watching their biggest export market slip away. Reports even suggest the deal came with a contingency. Argentina would have to unwind an $18 billion currency swap line it has with China. So in other words, this bailout wasn't really about helping Americans at all, it was about pulling Argentina away from China's orbit. That context is what makes this text message so damning. It was an admission that US policy, whether intentionally or not, handed China more leverage. So by bailing out Argentina while it was undercutting US soybeans, Washington weakened its own producers at the very moment they were the most vulnerable. And for farmers in the Midwest, who were promised America first, well, it's clearly the exact opposite of that. The US government is essentially admitting two things in private that it would probably never say out loud in public. First, that our biggest export market for soybeans is now gone, not because of weather or supply, but because of political choices. And second, in trying to stabilize Argentina with a $20 billion bailout, the administration may have actually undercut its own farmers. By removing tariffs, Argentina just made its beans cheaper overnight and China just swooped in. The timing obviously couldn't have been worse, as US harvest is beginning, silos are filling up, and instead of filling orders, many farmers are staring down bankruptcy. That phrase, "this gives China more leverage on us," should be concerning to just about anyone, but particularly anyone involved in American agriculture right now, as it means China not only has other suppliers to turn to beyond just Argentina, like Brazil, but they now have the ability to play them off each other. China can buy cheap soybeans from South America while holding out on US producers, watching prices drop, and then use that pain as a bargaining chip in future trade talks with the US. So, in other words, US farmers' livelihoods have become pawns in a geopolitical chess match. And here's the reality: soybeans aren't some niche crop. They are one of the backbones of American agriculture, grown in dozens of states all throughout the country. And they're tied to everything from animal feed to biofuels. So when prices collapse to levels not seen in years, it ends up rippling through entire local economies. Farmers, seed companies, equipment dealers, banks, on and on and on. Now, I know some people aren't going to have much sympathy for some of these businesses, but my point is that this impact isn't just felt in one particular area. And unfortunately, we've seen this story before, which I covered in a recent video, but back in Trump's first term, farmers did get a bailout package when the trade war with China left them stranded. And just recently, the USDA floated the idea of offering some form of support for cattle ranchers who are facing historically low cattle herd sizes, which is causing record high beef prices at the grocery store. Although interestingly enough, government officials stressed this support would not come in the form of direct checks to farmers. However, for grain and soybean farmers, there's still no clear plan ahead, despite farmers and certain lawmakers asking the administration for another bailout. What I find so interesting about all of this is when it comes to most of these viral news clips or the cries for help that some of the lawmakers are making, very rarely, if ever, do I see them ask for what the obvious solution to this problem would be. For the US to remove the tariffs on China so that China removes their retaliatory tariffs on the US. This will likely not bring the markets back overnight, but it seems like the most logical decision in terms of finding some sustainable solution. And oh, by the way, it helps out the rest of America at the same time because now they won't be subject to some arbitrary import tax. Like, I can't understand why on earth taxpayers should be bailing out farmers if the market to China is going to be completely squashed anyway. That seems like a band-aid fix that won't actually solve their problem in the months or years ahead. And of course, when discussing this story, we can't ignore the elephant in the room. Not all, but the majority of farmers throughout the US voted for this. It's what you might call identity over economics.
He said that he was going to get into these tariff situations while he was campaigning. So you knew that when you voted for him. Why did you vote for him when you knew that you might again face headwinds like you're facing now?
I voted for him because I'd like to see manufacturing come back to this country. I'd like to see good paying jobs. I want to see everybody do better. And I think this is some short-term pain for a long-term gain.
Farmers know these trade wars cost them money, but they see Trump as standing with rural America in ways they think maybe some Democrats don't. So even if these policies cut into their markets, cultural loyalty and political identity still carries more weight than their own balance sheets. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you want to learn more about the farming problem, you can check out what Arkansas farmers have been saying in this video here. Thanks for watching.